Hello and welcome to the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles podcast. Each episode will bring you the latest news from the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles, as well as fascinating interviews with entertainment personalities, government leaders, and community advocates. St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles, where Scotland meets the City of Angels. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to another great episode of the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles' podcast. I'm your host, Jowanna Lewis, and today we have got one for you intellectuals. I'm very excited about this particular show. First, I'd love to introduce you to our guest moderator and co-host, Mr. George Mitchell. George Mitchell has been with the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles since the 1970s. He currently serves as Vice President of Operations and has played an integral part in preparations for some of the Society's notable events and even designed the Society's tartan. After serving 40 years in law enforcement and for the federal government, George's time with the feds enabled him to travel throughout the world where he's met kings and queens, prime ministers, presidents, and a few rather dodgy dictators. Now, happily enclosed in his home in the Pacific Northwest, George is able to pursue his love of all things Scottish, not the least of which is history, bagpipes, and of course, whiskey.
Hi.
George, thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Joanna. And I'm so excited to be here today, continuing our series of podcasts celebrating Scotland's history, heritage, and culture. This is going to be a great opportunity, and I'm looking forward to it.
And today, I'd love to introduce you to our guest, Dr. David Caldwell. Dr. David Caldwell received a degree in archaeology from Edinburgh University and spent decades working for the National Museums of Scotland. Dr. David directed excavations in Finlaggan, Islay, and the Center of the Lordship of the Isles, and was a member of the international team that discovered and excavated the campsite of Alexander Selkirk, the inspiration for Robinson Crusoe. Dr. Caldwell has published over 100 articles in academic papers and has written 7 books and counting, including The Lewis Chessmen Unmasked. Among his many titles, he is a trustee of the Finlaggan Trust and a director of the Fife Cultural Trust. Please welcome to our podcast, the president of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, Dr. David Caldwell.
Thank you very much for that introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm very, very pleased indeed, and I look forward to this podcast greatly.
Thanks so much for taking the time today. This is really exciting to have both of you guys on the show. I can't even tell you how much I love reading and law enforcement, and so this is kind of like, I'm really jazzed about this particular episode, and I'm hoping that we get a lot of great stories and juicy information.
Well, excellent. Well, David, many of our St. Andrews members know about the Society of Antiquaries for Scotland. In fact, a number of our members are actual fellows. But there may be people watching today who are not familiar with the Society. And would you share some background on the history and mission of the Society? And would you touch on some of the more famous fellows, such as Sir Walter Scott?
Yes, of course. I mean, it's the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland is the oldest antiquarian society in Scotland. It was founded in 1780 by the Earl of Buchan. And over the years, we've been an independent academic society which has encouraged people to take an interest in the heritage, the archaeology, the history of Scotland. Not just professionals, but just people who happen to have a passion and an interest in the past of Scotland. All are welcome. We've published, we've supported research, we give out grants, we speak up for major issues when governments are looking for advice, and we offer programs of lectures. And over the years, we've had a number of very distinguished fellows. You mentioned Sir Walter Scott, great historian and novelist and poet. He was He was one of our early famous fellows. But there were a great number of other very considerable scholars in the 19th century. But I just want to focus on one man alone at the moment, Alexander Henry Rhind, who died when he was 30 years old in 1863. Very short life, but a very influential life indeed, because he left his estate to the society so that we could set up a series of lectures, series of 6 lectures which are given by a notable scholar every year. And what strikes me as remarkable is that over the years, if you look at academic books in bookshops or libraries and you flick through the pages, it's amazing how often you discover that they started off life as Rhind lectures. And I think that's been a remarkable influence by Rhind and the society.
Oh, that's fascinating. And what a great benefactor for the research and the society itself. So that's amazing. The society has been in existence for almost 2.5 centuries. What first inspired you to apply for fellowship? And I'm curious if there was a particular project or individual that piqued your interest, and that's what moved you to join.
Well, as a boy, I found myself getting more and more interested in archaeology and local history. And when other kids were out doing sensible things like playing football, I was, sort of looking at old ruins. And there was a local museum which was founded by a man called Owen Kelly. He was a local businessman who put the money into the museum himself and set up a very good museum. And he very much encouraged and supported me when I was a teenager. And he was one of the people, I think, who encouraged me to think, yeah, I could make this into a profession. I could go and do this as a career. And part of that process, I think, when I was a student, was the realization that I could become a fellow and get support from the wider fellowship.
Oh, excellent. As part of your membership, or certainly as a senior fellow and now president, you've delivered lectures all over the world for the society, covering a wide range of subjects, from David Ramsay, who served as the royal clockmaker to King James, to lectures on Scotland's significant historic contributions to culture, to military items such as arms, armaments, and fortifications. That's a wide range of subjects. Is there a particular subject that especially captured your interest or is close to your heart, and could you expand on that?
Right. One of the great joys of being a curator in a museum is that you are able to dabble, that you're able to take an interest in a wide range of different things. I'm very mindful, George, of your own interests and background, and it's quite easy for me to point out to you that one of the early interests I took when I joined the staff of the museum was in weapons, particularly early firearms. It's just something about them that fascinated me. And I soon discovered that the collection of the National Museum in Edinburgh had several beautiful late 16th, early 17th century pistols, which were made in centres like Edinburgh and Dundee, beautifully crafted and decorated, with quite sophisticated firing mechanisms, an early type of lock called a snap pants. And maybe that's the sort of thing you and I can speak about separately on another occasion.
I would enjoy that.
But very beautifully put together. And the remarkable thing about these pistols is that practically none of them were preserved in Scotland, although they were made by Scottish gunsmiths. The reason we know about them and we have them is a very fine because of a very fine Scottish scholar called Charles Whitelaw, who found a number of these pistols in royal and princely collections across Europe, places like Paris, Leningrad, St. Petersburg, Dresden, Spain, Italy, and right through Scandinavia, where these pistols had been acquired by princes and kings and been very much appreciated and admired. And in the course of the 20th century, some of them have indeed come back to Scotland. And I think they're a remarkable insight into the craftsmanship that Scots could produce in the years immediately before we entered this new phase of our life and became part of a joint kingdom, along with people in England and Ireland and Wales. And I think one of the insights which I've had about them is that they play very much, if you like, to a sort of Scottish characteristic. These pistols don't have safety locks on them. They don't have trigger guards. They have hooks so that you could slide them into your belt. And I have this image of our ancestors strutting down the centre of the high street in Edinburgh with these pistols shoved down their belts and pulling them on occasion, rather like the image we've got of the American Wild West, thanks to Hollywood films. I think that was Scotland at the beginning of the 17th century. And a lot of these, the gentlemen who had them, of course, went off to serve as mercenaries elsewhere. And in later generations, a lot of them did actually go to America. So I think there's a very interesting train there of things to look at. And certainly the pistols themselves, I think, are just absolutely wonderful.
I think we do share a certain commonality of rugged individualism. That was, I think, what helped build America, and I think that's what put Scotland in a center point in history. You can see exactly what you're talking about as far as engineering and manufacturing, and it always was just so well done, and I think leagues ahead of other nations. I'm curious on some of these pistols. Were you ever able to attach names or ownership to some of them?
Yes, right. One of the finest pairs, which we now have in Edinburgh, which were acquired from Russia after the First World War, appear to be made by James Lowe in Dundee, who is one of the best makers. But they have markings on them which indicate that they were in the personal collection of Louis XIII of France, who's quite a notable collection of firearms. So that's the sort of quality of thing we're dealing with and a level of appreciation. Kings of France appreciated them. Sad to say, perhaps not all of us Scots even knew about them.
Yes, true. Sad. I always think it adds something when you can put a name or ownership to an item or a piece of artifact or whatever. A little off topic, but I had a friend who collected antique arms, and he showed me a set of pistols once. They were 19th century, but I picked them up and I got a kind of an unusual feeling from holding it. And I said, what were these? And he goes, these rode in the charge of the Light Brigade. And he says, I have the name of the officer who carried them. And I thought, what a spectacular possession to have. What a piece of history that literally comes alive when you're in its presence. So that was exciting for me.
Things like that are very important. And if I may say, one of the things which fascinates me after a lifetime of being a curator is that you should be able to read objects like a book. It's not just about, it's a pistol and you can shoot people with it, or it's a clock and it's got nice decoration on it. You should be able to look at an object, and in the same way as you look at an early document, and get more and more information about our past. I think that's one of the important things.
Yeah, it is. It really, for me, that's what does make history come alive. And I think you share, obviously, that passion too. And hopefully we can inspire some others to do the same. It's not all dry. It's people who lived exciting lives before ours, and the things that they did and made are very important. I can't even speak highly enough about it. I'm curious, obviously this has been a lifelong career and passion for you. When did you first know you wanted to become an archaeologist? And again, to kind of ask, is there a particular person or event that inspired you? Because it's an unusual field. So I'm just curious.
I first discovered what archaeology was when I was about 10 or 11. I had a father who encouraged me enormously. And provided I was interested in something, he didn't worry about, oh, well, maybe that's a bit odd, or maybe you should do something more obvious or sane. So I expressed an interest in the past. He got me a book in archaeology. And all of a sudden I thought, yeah, this is me as an 11-year-old boy, wanted to go out and dig holes in the garden. And my father used to tease me as well. I mean, the house was next to the shore and there were bits of rotten wood, and he would say things like, well, maybe that's part of one of the ships of the Spanish Armada. But nevertheless, it was in the course of childhood I realised I wanted to be an archaeologist. And at first I thought that, well, this will be a good hobby. I'll become an electrician or a carpenter or something like that. But one day I had this thought pass through my head, and that was that, well, somebody had to be an archaeologist, and it was going to be me. So it was that passion, I think, that saw me through school and to university and into work, and absolutely no regrets about it, by the way.
That's excellent. There obviously had to be some challenges along the way. I mean, there are probably limited positions in archaeology. So while the passion's there, you still need the paycheck. So,
well, indeed, and there I must have been very lucky. I suspect, as a child, I was quite a backward child, I think. So it was archaeology that helped encourage me to work and do things. And perhaps at life I was so stupid in a way that it never occurred to me that I might not be able to do this. I was just lucky with my timing and my determination. And sometimes life's like that.
That's perfect. And sometimes when you don't know you can't do it, then you just go right ahead and do it.
Do it, exactly. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
So I've got a quick question for you. I know that Hollywood tends to portray archaeology as both scholarly and pretty glamorous. And we both know Hollywood depictions aren't totally accurate, and they usually do contain a bit of truth woven into that story. So the question is pretty much, what has been the most glamorous part of your career?
Right. Okay. Well, a number of years ago, and you mentioned it, I think, at the beginning, I was involved in excavations on an island in the Pacific, looking for the campsite of Alexander Selkirk, a Scottish castaway who was the inspiration behind Robinson Crusoe. And it was all thanks to a good Japanese friend who organised us going there, and along with some Chilean archaeologists. And there we were, hacking our way through the forest of this island, climbing a hill, going to this fascinating sort of clearing in the forest, thinking, well, maybe this was the place where Alexander Selkirk had his campsite. And frankly, it was a really long shot. I mean, yes, of course, we'd done research before we went, but the chances of actually finding something like that were a bit like finding a needle in a haystack. But nevertheless, we all got on very well with each other. The Chileans were really good people and very helpful. And we started off digging, hoping that we'd find some evidence for the presence of the Scotsman at the very beginning of the 18th century. And we dug there for 2 weeks, I think, just finding a Spanish colonial building of the later 18th century. And it looked like we were running out of luck. But as archaeologists often do in such circumstances, we kept on digging. And we did find evidence for the activities of a European who had been there. And we did find a key artifact, which I think allowed us to make the claim that we had found what we were looking for. Now, if you'd asked me before I went what that might be, I don't know what I would have said. I mean, we weren't going to find a sporran or a set of bagpipes, or if we'd seen an inscription saying, Alexander Selkirk, I was here, well, the cynic in me would have thought, yes, that will be right. But what we found was a tiny piece of metal, which I was able to identify as the tip from a pair of navigational dividers. We had several others of the period in the National Museum in Edinburgh. And the significance of that is that we know that Selkirk was the navigator on the ship that had taken him to the island. And when he was rescued, his rescuer specifically said that he had his navigational books and equipment with him. Now, in archaeological terms, I don't think you can do much better than that. And it was glamorous. It was fantastic. There we were, digging in a forest clearing, overlooking the Pacific, wonderful climate, hummingbirds flitting around, and going back home every evening to eat lobsters. Basically all there was to eat. I could suffer that, though.
I was going to say that. I think some people would settle for that as a vacation and not a dig. But, what a spectacular find.
That sounds great. How long I know you said it had been a couple of weeks before you guys started really finding things. How long were you there in total?
We were there for about 4 weeks. It involved a flight. It's about the island, which is now called Robinson Crusoe Island, is about 400 miles from the coast of Chile, and it involved flying there in a small 5-seater plane and a rather dubious voyage in a little open boat round the island to get there. But the locals, the Chileans, were absolutely wonderful to us. It was a great experience.
I'm just curious, obviously even a small island is a lot of land to cover. Did you have an idea of where you thought it might be, or how you actually were able to limit the area you were going to dig in?
Right, okay. My Japanese friend Daisuke had already visited the island, and he'd been shown a clearing in the forest by a local fisherman, which was identified as being the possible campsite. And Daisuke showed me the photograph a couple of years later and said, do you think that could be Selkirk's campsite? Now, one of the things I've learned in life is never say no until you absolutely have to. So I'm afraid I sort of said, oh, well, I suppose it might be. Not sure, but yeah, it might be. And on the basis of that, Daisuke went ahead and organised money and grants. And I found myself on a plane traveling to Chile thinking, oh dear, this is a bit of a wild goose chase, but we'll just have to do our best. And there really was very little basis for this. I mean, it's I and the Chilean archaeologists talked amongst ourselves about what strategy we would pursue if this turned out to be, to get something out of the project. But in fact, we genuinely do feel that we got what we were looking for, incredibly so.
Oh, that's a great story. That's a great story. One of your passions, the Lewis Chessmen, is perhaps the most famous chess set in the world. And for those who don't know what it is, they were discovered on the Hebridean island of Lewis in 1831. They're individually hand-carved from walrus ivory, totaling about 93 pieces, and they became prominent in popular culture when they appeared in the first Harry Potter movie. And in the film Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or Sorcerer's Stone for the American release, the Lewis chessmen are portrayed as pieces that appear to come to life as the match is played. They have detailed facial expressions. Some are whimsical, some are comical, some appear moody. You reveal in your book, The Lewis Chessmen Unmasked, some intriguing aspects about them. Can you share with us one startling discovery you made?
Right, okay. If it's just one, I think
or as many as you'd like.
Well, overall, I think the most important thing I think that we established is that the Lewis chessmen belong in Lewis. Okay, now that may sound a surprising thing to say, but let me explain that when they were found, scholars recognized that these were beautiful works of art dating to the 12th century, were very finely crafted. And they thought, how come such fine works of art have been found somewhere like Lewis, which is so remote and uninteresting? They didn't say where remote from, by the way, that's another story, but it's far away from London anyway, that's for sure. So there must have been some dreadful mistake as to why they ended up in Lewis. They obviously don't relate to Lewis, but it rains a lot of the time. So the only reasonable explanation is that they belonged to a merchant. They were being taken by a merchant somewhere much more interesting so they could be sold. And they ended up on a beach in Lewis by mistake. That's the best explanation. That they should really have gone to London or Dublin or somewhere like that. And not only was that a rather wicked, in a way, idea to come up with, the fact that idea stuck in people's minds meant that people forgot to ask other questions about them. If they were a merchant's hoard, it meant that they were all brand new and they all belonged together. It meant they didn't belong in Lewis. And straight off, you're then preventing people from thinking, well, wasn't somebody in Lewis who might have owned them? Maybe they're not all the same date. And that's what I like to think that we achieved was a sort of breakthrough in our ability to look at them in a different way and ask new questions.
I know that some of the pieces are in various museums. I think you take pride in the fact that the ones in Scotland are of particular note. Could you go into that?
Yeah, 11 of them are in the National Museum in Edinburgh, and the other 82, if my arithmetic is right, are in the British Museum. Okay. By the way, the British Museum were wonderful, very generous in encouraging the research that we undertook. And over the years, both they and the Museum in Edinburgh have allowed them to travel elsewhere. In fact, one of the visits I made to Los Angeles several years ago was to take some of the Lewis Chessmen over for an exhibition. Don't know if any of you remember that. But the chessmen, you mentioned a few minutes ago about the expressions on the faces. And that's one of the key things is the faces. And it's something that always drew me in my time in the museum, a feeling that perhaps the faces had something to say. And after a while, I reasoned that if the chessmen were made by different craftsmen, it might be the faces that would give us some indication of this. Because artists and cartoonists tend to give their faces similar characteristics. So I and my colleague, Mark Hall, works for Perth Museum, we got a very good forensic archaeologist involved in the project, Caroline Wilkinson, and we invited her to do studies of the faces, the shape and the form of the eyes, the nose, the relationships to each other. And on that basis, we've been able to come up with a picture that perhaps most of the chessmen were carved by 5 different craftsmen. And I think that's a very interesting insight into how this group were put together, and the fact that we were also able to identify that there were 1 or 2, let's say, unusual or odd pieces in the hoard, which we think are probably replacements for pieces which have been lost or broken. And all that helps confirm the picture we have that actually they belong to somebody local. And indeed, we've got suggestions as to who they might belong to, which perhaps other people haven't noticed in the past.
Oh, that's fascinating. It's interesting. I mean, some of the pieces are seated, some are standing, some are armed. So it's a very interesting range of depictions for what we have are pretty standard chess pieces, and these were obviously interestingly carved. I definitely piqued my interest. I'm going to have to get into this a little bit more. Break down and buy your book.
Splendid. I don't get a penny for it, but it's well worth reading.
No, it sounds fascinating. I was curious. A lot of people understand or are aware that Scotland is a beautiful country. It's been listed a number of times as the most beautiful country in the world. But a lot of people don't realize that Scotland can be a rather mystical or mysterious place. There are a number of stories involving ghosts, hauntings, and other ethereal occurrences that are woven through the culture. With Samhain on our doorstep, I'm wondering if you might be able to share some stories of Scotland's haunted history.
Right, yes. Well, we certainly do have, like lots of other countries, a rich tradition of about supernatural happenings. The sort of stories I like are one which I know of from the island of Islay, and it occurs elsewhere in Scotland, which is about the piper and his dog disappearing into a cave on the north coast of Islay. And the people hear him, going into the back of the cave with his dog, and the bagpipes keep playing and they keep playing. And eventually there's no sound. And and the piper doesn't reappear. But several days or weeks later, a very bedraggled dog comes out from another cave several miles away, looking very much the worse for wear. And I just love stories like that. And I think in a way it's a fairly typical Scottish type story. There are stories of people being scared by ghosts, where people were murdered and so on. But one of the other things which perhaps if I'd been in the museum for any longer, I would love to have explored a bit more, was the whole business of witchcraft. Because for all we Scots pride ourselves on our scholarly tradition and the way that we brought Renaissance or type learning. So I'm losing vocabulary in old age. Perhaps you know the word I'm trying to get here. I'll come to it. Learning and erudition and culture to other parts of the world. Despite that, we did go through a phase, like a lot of other European countries, of believing in witchcraft and doing lots of horrid things to mostly poor women in the late 16th and 17th century. James VI, James I of England, was responsible ultimately for some of this, believing that there were witches who had tried to sink the boat that he came back from Denmark in 1591 with his new queen. And that's something, it's a bit of an indictment on our culture. It demands more exploration, I think, that we weren't always doing good things or memorable things.
I appreciate that.
By the way, the Enlightenment, that was the word I couldn't get.
Trust me, believe me, I know the words out there sometimes, and give me a moment, I'll find it. But and certainly, the United States had its experience with witch trials and such, and not our finest moment. So I understand. Again, a group of people that should have been educated and enlightened, and fell into this almost a group panic. So it's an interesting bit of history that I've looked into just a little bit, and want to get into that some more. That's the nice thing about being retired. You do have the option of exploring different things at your own pace. I'm curious because obviously you're very Scottish, and I'm wondering if your heritage has contributed to your passion for your field, and if it has, exactly how.
Right, that's a very interesting question. Yes, I was brought up in Scotland. I've never had any doubt that I was Scottish, and I spent the whole of my life promoting Scottish heritage and culture. But in a funny sort of way, in my old age now, I'm beginning to take more and more interest in the whole business of Scottish identity and what it is. And some of the reason for that, I might say, is meeting and talking to people like you, not just in Los Angeles, but elsewhere in North America. We've had a fair amount of involvement with other people with Scottish roots, and Australia and New Zealand as well. And it fascinates me what people recognize about the past, or what they want to know, or how they want to see it. And we Scots, because we're all Scots, that's why we're talking to each other at the moment, we have an incredible brand, an incredible strong image, bagpipes, whiskey, tartan, military history, all sorts of things. But I want now to get to explore that a bit more and get a better understanding of it, and not take it for granted. There's all sorts of other things happening in the world out there, movements for changes in countries and government and all the rest of it. And no desire to be drawn into politics in any way. But clearly, if you're going to be Scottish, you want to be Scottish, it's important that you have some understanding, or is to me anyway, more of an understanding of what it's about. That's what I want to do and tell other people about it.
I couldn't agree more. I think you need to know a little bit about your past to help you get to your future. You've been involved in recent excavations in Finlaggan and Islay, which was the home of the MacDonalds, but it was more than that. And I really am interested in hearing what these excavations, what you were able to determine or learn from these extensive excavations.
Right. Okay. We excavated at Finlaggan, which is essentially two islands in an inland loch on the beautiful island of Islay, and we excavated over a period of time for 7 or 8 years in a row, collecting a vast amount of archaeological and historical data, some of which I'm still processing, literally thousands of bits of information and finds. And Finlaggan was, for some of its history, was not part of Scotland. The Western Isles only became part of Scotland as we understand it now in 1266. Before that, the Western Isles were a separate kingdom of the Isles. And then in medieval period, the MacDonalds, as the successors to the kings of the Isles, lords of the Isles, were really seen in the Gaelic and Irish world as an independent kingdom in many ways. They were potentially rivals of the Stuarts for power in Scotland, sometimes playing a dangerous political game, pitting the English against the Scots for their own benefit. And their heritage, their culture, their society was a particular one which was markedly different from what was happening elsewhere in Europe. It was a militarized society. It was one which didn't have urban centers. It was one where they relied on sea power and raiding and different form of art. Now, overall, this was a form of culture and society which in various ways was despised and rejected by power centres, powerful people in London and Edinburgh. And eventually the society, the way of life that this represented was put down, and there were even attempts to suppress the language Gaelic. But what's fascinating in many ways is that, and we were talking about it a few minutes ago, Scottish identity. The identity we now have of ourselves as Scots people, with our dress, with our music, with our whisky, with our martial tradition, was exactly the tradition, the way of life that was developed in the Western Isles, which we tried to suppress, which we have now adopted as this international image of Scottishness. And I find that a fascinating picture. And I hope very much our excavations will help us to explain why and how that happened.
It's fascinating. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I understand that obviously there were a number of Scandinavian visitors that came to northern parts of Scotland. And I'm just curious how those individuals, that stayed, intermingled, or how that affected the culture and the development in those different areas.
Very considerably. A lot of the Western Isles of Scotland, at first sight, the place names look as if they're Gaelic, but when you dig a wee bit underneath the surface of them, you discover that, in fact, the Scandinavian names, which had been Gallicized at a later period, because there was quite a considerable influx of Scandinavian people in the 9th and later centuries into Scotland, into the west of Scotland. And in many ways, the Kingdom of the Isles was a Scandinavian kingdom. They spoke a Norse language. And a lot of the families which we now think of as being Gaelic, who reinvented themselves as being Gaelic and Irish in the Middle Ages, like the MacDonalds, the MacLeods, the McAllisters, the Macaulays, all sorts of families that a lot of these people really had Viking blood flowing through their veins. And we need to show more recognition of that, it seems to me.
That is interesting. And it always has fascinated me that how the different cultures will meld, that different, some were raiders, some were adventurers, some just came to colonize, but all of a sudden they had this impact on the people who were currently living there, and how those cultures developed as kind of a joint one. And as you said, then they kind of imagine themselves down the road as being something more in line with one particular country or another. So it's just it's just a fascinating topic. I know that you were born, as we discussed, in Ardrossan in Ayrshire. Is that correct?
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
And I hope I pronounced that correctly.
You did indeed.
Oh, well, yeah, I got to work on my Gaelic. But growing up around there, I understand there was a castle and some other historical sites. And I think we touched a little bit on this earlier. But did that launch your passion for archaeology? And could you share some personal insights or little-known aspects of Ardrossan and Ayrshire? Beautiful area.
Right. It is indeed. It's a small seaside town on the coast of Ayrshire, looking out to the island of Arran and Kintyre and the Western Isles. And I was brought up, happy memories of an idyllic childhood, swimming in the sea and going and examining the ruined castle, which was in the centre of town. And I spent a lot of time as a child with a measuring tape and with a kid's camera, studying this castle and trying to understand it. And I was encouraged by my father to do this sort of thing. And I mentioned Owen Kelly, the founder of the local museum in Carlisle. I was invited to give a talk on it. And as a student, I presented my first paper for publication to the Society of Antiquaries on Ardrossan Castle. And a very distinguished architectural historian, John Dunbar, was invited to actually review my paper. And he came all the way down to Ardrossan to go over the castle with me. And he was obviously very interested in what I'd done and recommended that the paper should be published. And John, who sadly passed away at a very great age just a couple of years ago. He was a man who, because I published that paper and because he knew who I was, recommended that I get a job in the museum. So that's the sort of some of the serendipity that happened in my life. Things moved in the right direction and I was very lucky. But I still have a very, very keen interest in Ardrossan Castle. And I'm involved with a local heritage group there and in helping them to make it better known and more accessible to the public.
Oh, it's excellent.
So I've got a question for you. Is there a topic or a place that's kind of considered like the hot topic now in archaeology? And if there is, where is that and what would it be?
Right. Well, one of the things which I think is really good news for you and your members is that there isn't one. Okay? There's lots and lots and lots. And whether you're a total amateur, totally ignorant, whether you're a very considerable scholar, there is room for lots and lots of people, for everybody to get involved. And let me say that some of the best insights I've had on things like the Lewis Chessmen have been when I've gone somewhere to give a lecture and I've thought that I've done all this research, and somebody in the audience, sometimes a school kid, have stuck their hand up and said, yes, but what about? And I've thought, oh, I never thought of that. That's a brilliant question. And that's often the way of these things, to develop a passion and interest. Look, if I was a prehistorian, I'd be telling you about the wonderful excavations that are taking place up in Orkney at the moment, which are redefining everything we know about the Stone Age in Britain and Europe. Or I could point out that we've got World Heritage sites at the island of St Kilda, well off the west coast of Scotland, or the Roman Wall, which has got Roman scholars really excited. And I'm not just saying this because it's you. For me personally, I think where a lot of it's at the moment, where a lot of the great interest is in what we over here call the Scottish diaspora. This understanding that there may only be about 500 of us living in Scotland who claim to be Scottish because we live in Scotland, but there's an incredible amount of other people. I think one of the best figures is 30 million elsewhere in the world who are passionately interested in Scotland and rightfully regard themselves as Scottish and have an incredible wealth of knowledge about our past, whether in Scotland itself or overseas, and whole areas of interest which are influencing the way we think back here in Scotland. And I think that's fantastic. I think that's really good. And I'm very pleased to say that the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland are moving, perhaps very slowly, in the direction of encouraging more and more of this interest and bringing together interests and studies and research in places like the United States. I think that's where a lot of it is. And I suspect we will find that there are whole areas of knowledge and interest that we should be taking a lot more seriously because of you people.
Ah.
We've touched briefly on the Society of Antiquaries. I'm just curious, to become a fellow, one needs to show a commitment and a passion for both Scotland's history and future, and to have two fellows provide a letter of recommendation. What are you looking for in future members of the Society?
Just a passion and an interest in Scottish history and archaeology. One of the I'm rather proud of the fact that we call ourselves a society of antiquaries. We're a society. We're not an institution. A society implies what we're doing now, that we can actually speak in a friendly, interesting way with each other. The other thing, the word antiquary, which is often in the past seemed very old-fashioned. Well, for me, I think it means that we are not just an archaeologist or a herald or a numismatist, but we're people who can recognize that we can take a whole wide sweep of interest whether we're experts in it or not. Those are important aspects of it. It's not just about being professional, it's about being amateurs, and we welcome applications for fellowship from new people. You've pointed out that one of our requirements is that we have people recommended for fellowship and then seconded by another name. But we have people standing by who are prepared to put the name to worthwhile requests. And in fact, I hope very much that we will see other nuclei of people and fellows in other parts of the world, including Los Angeles, where it will not be a problem. Obviously, any society, we've got to have the capability of making sure that we're not, use some language from your past, infiltrated by some group which does not have our interests at heart. But by and large, we're an open and welcoming society. And I suspect that if you're a member of the St. Andrew Society of Los Angeles, you're probably well on the way to being an appropriate person to be one of our fellows.
Oh, that's excellent. I know that when our president, Kimberly Bradford, joined, she spoke to a number of people. And I think maybe to how do I want to put it, put aside some people's concerns. I think maybe some people might feel that, oh, this is a very intellectual society, and it is, but that I'm not that skilled, or I don't have this, degree or whatever, so I wouldn't be a good member. And Kimberly brought back the fact that no, it's the passion, it's the interest, and just what you said, that you welcome people who are amateurs or enthusiasts, because all are welcome, and everybody contributes to the society in one way or another. So I'm hoping that this will help get the word out about the society in our area, and some of our members may approach people on the board or in the society who are already members of the Society of Antiquaries and ask about what it takes to become a member. So I'm looking forward to a positive reaction for that. And we're happy to be part of that. I'm a member. I'm a fellow, and very, very pleased to be one. And just look through some of the paperwork and the books that are available, and the lectures that are offered. It's just it's really an exceptional organization that does a lot of great work. You've served as president for 2 consecutive terms, and my hat's off to you, having been a vice president for several terms. It's a lot of work, and but well worth it. Your current term comes to close next month, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So you've had 6 years of leadership in the society. What do you list as your most significant accomplishment?
Right. I list as my most significant accomplishment letting the very good staff members and fellow members of council get on with doing what they do best. And what that is, I think, over the last 6 years, is making the society and all that we do and think much more accessible, making much of what we do available online, including our lectures, making our publications open access, and opening up the society to fellows elsewhere in the world. So it's been a great pleasure and privilege to have this opportunity to speak to your members in this way. One regret, if you like, is that I thought I was well in the way to helping the society improve or establish new accommodation in Edinburgh. Lack of accommodation has been one of our problems. We haven't had decent accommodation for our staff. We've been very fortunate in having the support of the National Museums in giving us space in their premises. but we were very much hoping to be able to develop our own heritage hub so that when people like you and from elsewhere came to Edinburgh, you would have a place to go to meet other people, find out what's happening, be able to suck in so much of what we were doing. And it may still be the case that I can make a significant announcement about progress in this at our anniversary meeting in a month's time. But inevitably, COVID-19, which you've no doubt heard about, has set back some of our plans just a bit. But I hope very much that as a society, we're very much on the verge of, as it were, going from being a fuddy-duddy, is that a word you guys know in America? Being a fuddy-duddy, old-fashioned organisation, very wealthy one, to one which is truly global and all-embracing. I think that is very important in this day and age. So keep your fingers crossed that that's what we can achieve.
Oh, well, fingers crossed for you, sir.
Yeah.
I'm curious, as you leave your position as president, is there something that you see in the future for you?
For me, right, okay. Well, I'm still very much got to produce the final report on the excavations at Finlaggan. It's a monumental task. It's going to be a 200,000 word publication. I'm doing a lot of the work myself, but I'm one of these people. I can't just settle down in life and do one thing. I've always got to do more than one. And one thing that might interest you, and again, you may have views on it, is that I'm working with two other younger scholars to produce a new account, detailed analysis of the Battle of Pinkie, the last battle between the Scots and England as separate kingdoms in 1547. And I think there's a lot of archaeological and historical and topographical information all to be brought together. And I love that antiquarian approach of not just being stuck with a bunch of documents or a bunch of cannonballs, but you can actually mix the two and come up with a new and better picture. And I'm still involved in lots of other things, other bodies. I don't know about you, but in my line of work, I thought I was retiring from the National Museums 8 years ago now, and I thought I was walking out the door and that was it. But of course, so many of the emails and contacts have followed me, and I haven't quite yet got to the stage of ignoring them or telling people, no, I'm sorry, that was another age, forget it.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to say no, especially with the passion. One of the things I wanted to ask you before we close, I know that your annual general meeting is coming up next month. And one of the things that caught my eye was, I believe it closed in June, but you were having a design contest for a society tartan. And as I was involved in that for the St. Andrews Society, obviously you can't give away any secrets, but I'm really excited to see of what exactly that will be. I mean, I assume that the submissions have come in and decisions have been made, and you're ready to announce when the.
Telling you nothing. Telling you nothing. You will find. But, however, we were very pleased. We had some real quality submissions. We were spoilt for choice, as it were, but we nevertheless managed to pick a clear winner, which I'm very happy with. And I hope very much that you folks like it when you find out about it in a month's time.
I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be a long month waiting to see what exactly you decided. But I guess before we close, is there anything that you wanted to add that we didn't cover, or something you feel we might touch on before we conclude?
No, I don't. Not that I can immediately think of. But I hope very much that we get over our present restrictions in travel, and that we see much more of each other in the future. I'd love to come back to California, and I hope very much that you guys get over to Scotland. And, in principle, we're open to doing more, speaking to you more in the future, if that helps encourage everything that we're all passionate about.
I think that would be excellent. Yes, we're all looking forward to being able to travel again. And I know so many people have had to put their plans to visit Scotland on hold. And so when the restrictions are lifted, I fear it may be like the dam bursting. So you all ought to prepare yourselves for an onslaught. But we're looking forward to it. And we hope we see you in California again. That would be wonderful.
Well, thank you both so much for taking the time out today to speak to the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles' podcast. It has been an absolute pleasure, completely eye-opening. Dr. Caldwell, is there a website or anything that people could go to get more information?
The Society of Antiquaries website, www.socantscot, SOCANTSCOT, or one word, .org. We'll have a lot of the information that people need, and they can write in, email in. Yeah. And there'll be information there on applying to become fellows.
Fantastic.
Certainly thank everybody for joining us. And David, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope we have an opportunity to speak again in the future. It's been...
I hope so too. I very much enjoyed it too.
Quite enjoyable, and all the best in your future endeavors.
You too.
Again, thank you both so much. And thank you out there for listening and watching the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles' podcast. We will see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles podcast. For more information on the St. Andrews Society of Los Angeles, visit www.standrewsla.org. And don't forget to like our Facebook page, Instagram, and YouTube channels as well. Have a great week, and we'll see you next episode.